Kagurabachi is all about grief. And if y'all are still sleeping on this series, please pick it up. It is so good. It only continues to get better. This most recent chapter just gave us some insight on one of the primary antagonists, and he too is suffering from grief. And we are getting this through so many different lenses in this series, but primarily the Enchanted Blade Wielders. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and also a few questions I've gotten about Kagurabachi. All right, first of all, shout out to Agha who inspired this video, and primarily they wanted to know what my thoughts were on the two unrevealed Enchanted Blade Wielders and how they may be a new lens on this theme of grief. So we will get to that, but first I wanted to do a brief exploration of the characters we have seen, because I do believe grief to be the most central core theme of this series. You know, it's easy to think that Kagurabachi is about revenge at the onset because it kind of is presented that way. You know, Chihiro waking up every day with fresh hatred, trying to avenge the death of his father. But as the story progresses, we really see what's at the heart there, and it is grief. And I think it was even in one of the most recent chapters, maybe 101, somewhere around there, where we find out that, you know, it's not about revenge for Chihiro. His wish was to stand side by side with people like Azumi and Shiba and fight for what his dad believed in. He's trying to fight for that ideology and make sure that his father's vision is upheld in regards to his creation, the Enchanted Blades, right? So Chihiro, as our MC, like, it's clear how grief is at the center of everything. He's trying to wrestle with that horrific loss of his father. And in his way, the way he's doing it is by honoring his legacy and trying to cement that. But, of course, the interesting thing here is Chihiro figuring out how he perceives these things as he's finding out more about them, right? Finding about what the Enchanted Blades actually did, kind of, you know, more than just the myths and legends he heard about his father and the stories from people like Shiba, etc., right? So we're really getting to see Chihiro find his own perspective in all of this. But again, his driving focus has been kind of protecting and honoring his father's legacy. Next, Samra is probably the most fully fleshed out in this regard when it comes to the Enchanted Blade Wielders, primarily because he's had a lot of development time associated with him, right? The man that literally blinded himself because he couldn't bear to look back at the things he had done, right? He was so haunted by his past and what he had done that he literally just couldn't cope with it. He clearly has PTSD, and probably, you know, most of the people that actually participated in the war have some form of PTSD, but we know that in Samra specifically, it manifested as just this absolute avoidance, right? He refused to look at things. Again, you know, very symbolic with his own blinding of himself. But really, you know, he was so hyper-focused on the past, he couldn't see what was happening in front of him, you know, primarily with his daughter. Again, all done really well, but Samra is someone who just, like, cannot move forward because of his grief and regret. He's very much stuck in the past until he kind of has this realization, and, you know, Chihiro gets through to him. Next, with Urua, we haven't gotten too much development yet, but there have been some interesting pieces shown, right? Primarily his very, like, happy-go-lucky attitude for the most part. Like, he seems rather content, but what's interesting is we know that he, like, lamented the fact that he's been sidelined for 18 years, right? Like, the happiest moment in his life was when Kunishig chose him and he got to be of service and be a blade wielder, right? And he wants, like, nothing more than really to, like, have that again. So for me, and that's not to say that, like, this is all just a coping mechanism, but it seems as if, like, Urua would like nothing more than to be of service again. That's seemingly how he deals with his grief, if you will. And we do see that, you know, in his battle against Yura and Hakuta, when he really locks in, like, not that it's a mask, not that he's being fake in his kind of happy-go-lucky term, but, like, he goes back to that time where he was at war and he was just a demon, right? So we know that, like, there's more under the surface there, and I really think that Urua copes by being of service. Then with Misaka, we almost had the complete opposite effect, right? We know that after he was kind of forcibly retired and separated from his blade, he became completely apathetic. Like, he didn't continue training with the sword at all, something that completely baffled his brother and would upset Hokuto when he came to fight him, right? It seems as if Misaka just became completely apathetic, and, you know, there wasn't too much development here, so I don't want to, like, deep dive too much into his characterization, but he seemingly became a man that just became lost and didn't know what to do with himself after the war. Next, I wasn't sure if I should include Hirohiko here, but he is technically a blade wielder, right? He didn't participate in the war, obviously, but neither did Chihiro and neither did Yura, who we're going to get to here in a minute. And I think there's much more to come with Hirohiko, but I do think he serves as a fantastic foil to Chihiro. And maybe grief isn't the best word to apply to his situation, but at least not in the same way, but I do think he is a representative of this coping mechanism of having gone through some horrific things in his childhood, right? We know that he was assaulted, and the way that he has basically decided to cope with this is just like a complete burning of everything down, right? Like Hirohiko is almost like a nihilist. He doesn't see the meaning in anything, so he's just, having fun with it on his way. And again, I think there's much more to explore here, but again, maybe if grief isn't the right word, coping mechanism certainly is, and he represents an entirely new take compared to everyone else we've seen so far. And of course, we've got the swordmaster, but this man is such an enigma that I don't even really want to speculate on how he plays into these themes yet, because there's just so much we don't understand about the situation. Now, for all intents and purposes, it appears as if he doesn't have any remorse or guilt over the things he did in the war, but I do think there's much more uncovered that could help us contextualize his actions, and it will remain to be seen. So that leads us back to Yura with this latest chapter, where it's revealed that his whole reason for this is grief, right? After the war, things were good, at least for a minute, but then many horrors ensued, including him losing his wife or fiance, right? And we know that basically Yura's whole mission statement is like, things could have been better. Like, your father hoarded away those blades when they really could have led to some change for good in this world. So we see that the way that Yura is dealing with his grief is by becoming a sin eater, right? By doing whatever it takes in order to bring about a better world. Like, quite literally, the ends justify the means. Yura is coping with this by absolutely thrusting himself into the role of creating that better world, to a place where this won't happen again because of me. So all of this just made the latest chapter so compelling, right? Because it's revealed that Yura isn't some evil mustache twirling villain just out to consolidate power for himself. No, he's literally fighting for what he believes is a better world, right? He thinks that, these blades could have prevented so many horrible things that are happening in the world. So I will do what it takes. I will commit horrible things, but I will make those as minimal as possible in order to get to this greater good that I am after. And so that ideology is clashing against Chihiro's, right? Who, again, Chihiro is kind of forming his own perspective on this as the story goes, but primarily he's fighting for what his father believed in, right? And so, who was right? Was his father right to hoard the blades away? Or is Yura right in that they could have helped make the world a better place, and just taking them away was selfish? Your father created this current world, right? And it's incredibly compelling because there is no easy right or wrong in this situation. And if we can pause here really quick, I did have a couple of questions specifically about this interaction that would make sense to address right now. So starting with this one from Aslan, who says, why do I think Chihiro is trying to talk sense into Yura? It seems like he is trying to actively reject the legacy his father created with the blades in the war. Do you think he's being immature about this? What are the possible consequences of Chihiro not actively rejecting the Enchanted Blade's existence and instead trying to say that they are tools to help people? And I think this is the point of this moment. I don't think Chihiro is being immature, and I don't know if he's trying to talk sense into Yura insofar as hey, let's talk this out and we'll come to an understanding. I think this is just their ideological clash, right? This is kind of a mirror on how the two are dealing with their grief, which I won't launch into again, but we know that Yura is motivated by having lost somebody close to him, the same way Chihiro is, right? And Chihiro believes in the vision that his father created. He's still wrestling with all of that, and which is why I think that Chihiro's perspective can and will shift over the series and how he views the blades. But I do think that he truly believes his father created those with the greatest of intentions. He created those to be tools to help people, but then he was horrified by what became of those creations, right? So these are all still things that I think Chihiro is trying to cope with. So he's just trying to, for the best of his ability right now, honor his father's legacy and the intended purpose of the blades. So that's what he's fighting for. Whereas Yura is your father created this hellhole we live in right now. I'm trying to do the right thing by using these for good, right? So no, I don't think Chihiro is being immature. I think this is just their wills clashing against each other. And again, it'll be interesting to see see how that shapes the both of them moving forward. And then on this same subject, Branwyn says, locking up the Swordmaster and the Sanuchi makes sense. However, I at least partially agree with Yura. They definitely could have used the other swords and sword bearers to enact justice. And yeah, I mean, there's absolutely an argument to be made there, which is why this is so compelling, right? It's not black and white. Could they have just locked up the guy that actually committed the genocide and then used the other blades as a force for good in the world? Yes, but was there any guarantee that that actually would have played out that way? And no, that's why we have to look at this, from Kunishige's perspective, which was the man he trusted the most, his best friend, right? His brother-in-law, in fact, committed a genocide with this blade. He became someone he didn't even recognize, right? So yeah, we can lock him up and then cross our fingers and hope for the best with the other 5 of these nuclear weapons out there. Or it's like, no, I'm not even going to take that risk. Samra, Urua, I may think you're great right now, but I don't know what can happen, and I'm not willing to risk another genocide on my hands. So we're taking all of the blades and locking them up. And I can completely understand that perspective as well. So again, that's just what makes this so compelling. There is seemingly no perfect right answer here. And we didn't even talk about this in our earlier examination, but Kunishige's grief is at the heart of all of this, right? It was his inability to cope with what he had created that set off the events of this story. His mechanism was just retreating into his own little bubble, kind of like trying to separate from the world entirely and kind of live in a bit of a fantasy land. And we know that when that bubble got popped, all of this stuff is still here to deal with, which is Chihiro's entire journey. So now to circle us all the way back to Agha's original question here, which is, what do I think these other 2 unrevealed Enchanted Blade Wielders might show us about this theme, or how they might be processing their grief and remorse? And honestly, I don't know, just because there's so little we know about them. But I mean, we could just look at other things that maybe necessarily haven't been explored yet. We know that he's like a sushi chef, right? So maybe he's kind of throwing himself, maybe almost in a destructive manner, into something else, into a distraction, if you will. Or maybe we could have some sort of substance abuse come into play as a coping mechanism, whether it be alcoholism or any number of things, right? So maybe either of them could show us that. Or maybe we could have somebody that is kind of adapting well. And not to say that they have no qualms about what they did in the war or anything, but we so far, with kind of the exception of Urua, have had, people being plagued by this in one way or another. So maybe we have somebody that's just really healthily coped with it, I don't know. I would love to hear y'all's ideas for how we might see these themes in a new lens through them. And then finally, Aslan asked me another question, which was, would I be mad if the Hishaku came out of this arc completely unscathed? Because personally, he never likes it when villain groups are just invincible and basically punishing the protagonists the entire story until the climax. So do I think that the Hishaku needs to potentially have someone die, or is justice better served down the line? And this is interesting, 'cause I get what you're saying with that criticism when bad guys are just kind of this invincible force that pushes the story forward and nothing really happens until the end. I don't feel like Hokuzono is going to do something like that, but I mean, we're going to have to wait until this arc ends and see if they actually do suffer any meaningful losses. And I don't think that necessarily has to mean somebody dies per se, but we'll see, right? So I guess reserving judgment on it, if that does indeed happen, then yes, I wouldn't like that either. But I don't imagine that's going to be the case in this story. Like you mentioned, they have suffered some kind of setbacks, but again, in absence of somebody actually dying, is it that meaningful? And I still think it can be meaningful without a death, but we're just going to have to see. Anyways, this was a long Kagurabachi yap, so let me know if you guys are here for these types of videos, but thank you guys so much for the support and the questions, and as always, thank you for watching.